Chapter 1. The Night Watch Takes the Street. Mud was a town's first religion. It clung to everything: boots, cartwheels, hems of skirts, the hems of prayers. It filled the ruts like black soup, and swallowed dropped coins without even a glint of shame. In Hoen Mark, a border town squatting where the Empire's map began to lose its certainty, the earth itself seemed tired of carrying men. The palisade that ringed the place had been raised in brighter years, when the road still carried spice and silk instead of ash and bones. Now the timbers were warped and weeping pitch, and the iron-bound gates hung a finger's breadth crooked. Old nails bled rust. A tattered banner of Sigmar drooped from the watchpost crossbeam. The twin-tailed comet on it faded, until it looked less like a sign of salvation, and more like a smear left by something crawling out of the dark. Under that banner, the militia drank. 2 watchmen leaned on their halberds as if the weapons were crutches. Their helmets sat in the mud, used as spittoons and ashtrays. A bottle made slow, reverent passes between them. Blown glass, cheap spirits, the true currency of Hohenmark's defenders. A wagon rolled by the gate, empty and scrubbed too late. The bed was stained where blood had seeped into wood grain and refused to be forgotten. The driver kept his eyes down. People did that here. They looked away from anything that might ask them to care. From the north wall came a soft thump, someone climbing down, not bothering to hide it. The sentry had decided he was cold, bored, and alive, and that was enough. Somewhere in the lanes behind the square, a door slammed. A woman's voice rose in anger, and then vanished, as if the town swallowed its own outrage to avoid choking. The shrine bell rang, 3 dull strikes. The shrine itself was a squat stone box with whitewash flaking off like scab skin. Its candles guttered in old wax. People drifted in and out, with bowed heads, not from burning faith, but from habit, like touching a bruise, just to confirm it still hurt. They prayed to Sigmar because the alternatives were worse. Admit no one listened, or start listening to whispers that came from the trees. Deserters left at dusk. You could see them if you knew where to watch. Men with bundles wrapped in sailcloth, slipping through a gap in the palisade where the wood had rotted away. They moved like thieves, though many had once sworn oaths with hands on hammer and book. Some left wives and children, some left debts, some left only their names scratched off a roster nobody bothered to keep up to date. The watch didn't stop them. Sometimes the watch helped them. "Not my fight," a militiaman muttered one evening, handing a deserter a lantern as if he were doing charity. "Not any more." The road beyond the gate ran east and west like a scar. It had been a lifeline once. Now it was a rumor told by men who still owned teeth. Caravans came less each season. When they came at all, they arrived half-burned canvas patched with crude stitching, wheels bandaged with rope, drivers with soot in their hair, and the 1,000-yard stare of men who'd watched friends die in the ditch. When they didn't come, Hohenmark went hungry. When they did, Hohenmark got blood. On the last day of Ulrich's sight, a teamster stumbled into the square with his hands shaking so badly he couldn't hold a cup. He kept saying the same thing, over and over, as if repetition could hammer the words into something less real. They took the horses. They took the wagons. They nailed my cousin to the axle, like a sign, like a warning. The reeve's clerk wrote it down. The watch drank. The shrine bell rang. Life trudged on in mud and resignation. Then a merchant's child went missing, and the town discovered it still had a heart, if only enough of one to fuel anger. It began with a shout behind the tanner's yard, a small voice, sharp, frightened, then cut off. People pretended not to hear, because in Hoen Mark, hearing meant obligation. Then the merchant, old and fright, burst into the square barefoot, fine coat flapping open, mud splattering the hem like mockery. His face was slick with rain and panic. "My boy!" he shouted. "My boy Sigmar, save me!" His wife followed, a shawl thrown over her head, sobbing so hard she seemed to be tearing herself apart from the inside. Fright seized the nearest watchman by the jerkin and shook him. "You're the watch," he cried. "Do something. He's 7. He has a birthmark. He was at my stall, and then he was gone." The watchman stank of spirits. His eyes took their time focusing. "Could have wandered," he said, voice thick with indifference. "Wandered?" Fright's voice cracked. "Into the lower quarter? Into the woods? You know what's in the woods?" The watchman's gaze slid away. "Not our problem till sundown," he muttered. Clara Venn stepped in before the merchant could get himself clubbed for insolence. She was the reeve's right hand, the one who counted coin, soothed tempers, and lied to keep the town standing. Ink stained her fingers. Her hood was drawn tight against the rain. She caught Freight by the shoulder, hard enough to steady him. "Olden," she said, controlled and sharp. "Tell me where you last saw him." "He wanted honey cakes," Freight babbled. "I turned to count coin and he was gone," came a voice like iron scraping stone. Sister Margaret Holt stood at the edge of the square, her battered hat dripping rain. Her coat was a deep red, patched and scuffed, smelling faintly of smoke. Around her neck hung the hammer of Sigmar plain metal, heavy, honest. Her face was bluntly expressive, carved by hard seasons and harder disappointments. She stared at the watch post with contempt she didn't bother to disguise. "Your oath isn't a thing you wear only at sundown," she called. "Or have you all grown so soft you need daylight to remember honor?" One of the watchmen spat. Another chuckled, the sound sour and thin. "Sister, go ring your bell," he said. "Let Sigmar find the boy." Margaret stepped forward, and for a moment it looked like she might strike him. She had the shoulders for it. She had the scars. Instead, she pointed at the mud around the watchpost, footprints layered over footprints, a mess of drunken shuffling and apathy. "If a beastman walked through your gate right now," she said, "you'd ask it for a drink." The crowd gathered quickly. Misery always drew an audience. Faces leaned in, eager for someone else's pain, eager for someone to blame. Clara felt the heat of their anger building like a fire that had been banked too long. She climbed onto the stone lip of the well and raised her hands. "Listen to me," she shouted. "We will search." "Who?" someone yelled. "The drunkards? The watch won't. You don't care." A bottle flew and shattered near her boots, glass biting the mud. The crowd surged. Clara saw fists clench, saw that feral spark that made riots. She opened her mouth to shout again, and heard boots. Not the sloppy slap of a drunk, not the scuff of a coward. Measured steps, slow enough to be deliberate, loud enough to cut through the noise. Heads turned one by one, as if pulled by an invisible string. A figure entered the square without ceremony. He wore a cloak so dark it seemed to drink the lantern light. Rain slid off it in cold streams. A helm covered his face entirely, black metal, dull, with a narrow slit for eyes. He moved with balance, every step placed as if he'd measured the ground first. The sword hung at his hip, the scabbard worn, the hilt plain. In one gloved hand he carried a rolled parchment sealed with red wax. Behind him followed two men with lanterns, their faces tight and pale, as if they were escorting their own funeral. The town's noise died, not because anyone commanded it, because the air around the stranger grew heavy. Even the watchman at the gate stood straighter, without knowing why. Clara stepped down from the well. "Who are you?" she demanded, because someone had to speak first. The stranger stopped in the center of the square, his helm angled slightly, taking in the broken bottle, the sobbing mother, the watch-post with its drunken guardians. When he spoke, his voice was low and level, the kind of voice you heard at an execution just before the blade fell. "Captain," he said. "Night watch." "That's not," began a watchman, then stopped, his courage dying in his throat. The captain lifted the parchment. The red wax seal bore a crude sigil, a mailed fist clenched around a baton, stamped over a smear of crimson. It wasn't a provincial mark Clara recognized. It looked like something hammered out in a war camp and obeyed because arguing meant pain. He broke the wax with his thumb and unrolled the decree just enough to show the signature at the bottom. He didn't read it aloud. He didn't need to. The seal did the speaking. "By order of the Red Marshal," he said, and the name moved through the crowd like a cold draft. "The night watch is mine. Effective now." Clara's mouth went dry. "We haven't had a marshal's word in—" "You have it now," the captain replied, folding the parchment away like an inconvenience. Freight stumbled forward. "You'll find my boy?" The helm turned toward him. Through the slit, Clara glimpsed eyes, steady, dark, unblinking. "I will find what can be found," the captain said, "and I will punish what can be punished." Sister Margaret stepped closer, hammer pendant thudding against her chest. "Punish who?" she demanded. "Bandits? Vermin? Or the men who let it happen?" "All of them," the captain said. No speech, no rallying cry. He simply walked toward the watchpost as if it already belonged to him. Men moved aside without realizing they were moving. He climbed the wet steps and looked down at the watchman with the flat appraisal of a butcher inspecting meat. "You," he said, pointing at the drunkest. "Name." The man swallowed. Ralph, the captain repeated. "You were asleep." Ralph puffed up with the wounded pride of a coward. "Wasn't." The captain snatched the bottle from his hand and hurled it against the post. Glass exploded. Spirits splashed like cheap blood. "You will not drink on duty again," the captain said calmly. "If you do, I will nail your hands to this beam so you remember what duty costs." Ralph's face drained of color. Nobody laughed. The captain's gaze swept the rest. "Assemble the watch at sundown, every man with a badge. If you're absent, I will find you. If you flee, I will drag you back by your ankles." He paused. Rain ticked against his helm. "Bring me Sergeant Jorek Roln." A murmur ran through the watch. Jorek Tin Hand, the veteran with the ruined hand and the temper like a storm. He drank too much, but he'd fought enough border skirmishes to remember what fear smelled like. That evening the night came early, clouds rolling in like bruises. Lanterns guttered in damp air, casting sickly pools of light that did more to deepen shadows than banish them. The watch gathered behind the watch-house, a sagging building with a cracked foundation and a stink of old sweat. Men stood in loose clumps, muttering. Spears leaned at angles like drunk men. A few had armor, most had excuses. The captain stood in the doorway, a black cutout against lantern glow, and did not speak until all eyes were on him. Jorik arrived last, pushing through with shoulders hunched under a battered coat. His left hand was wrapped in a leather brace, fingers twisted like roots. His right held a cudgel, because blades and drink made for accidents. His eyes were bloodshot but sharp. "I hear there's a new captain," Jorik growled, "and I hear he thinks he owns my men." The captain stepped down into the mud. "I own your knights," he replied, "and your knights own this town." Jorik snorted. "You don't look like much. You look like a grave with legs." "Good," the captain said. "Graves are honest." He faced the watch. "Tonight we sweep the lower quarter," he said. "Fast, loud, thorough. We remind this town that darkness belongs to us, not to thieves and carrion." A man in the back scoffed. "And if you find thieves," the captain said, "you bring them to me. And bandits, kill them." The bluntness landed like a slap. Men shifted uneasily. Jorik's jaw tightened. "We don't execute without..." "Without what?" the captain cut in, and for the first time there was an edge, like steel being drawn. "Permission? From who? The reeve who counts coins while bodies rot in the ditch? The drunk who can't lift his spear? The corpse nailed to a wagon axle?" He stepped closer to Jorik until the veteran could have kissed the helm. "Chaos doesn't wait for paperwork," the captain said, "and mercy is a luxury bought with strength. This town is bankrupt." Jorik held the captain's gaze through the slit. For a breath, it looked like he might swing the cudgel and start a different kind of riot. Then he spat into the mud. "One sweep," he said. "Then we talk." The captain nodded once, as if agreement were irrelevant. "Form up." They went into the lower quarter in a ragged line, lanterns bobbing like fireflies in a corpse's mouth. The lanes narrowed, houses leaning in close as if to listen. Filth pooled in the gutters, thick and black. Rats watched from broken stoops. Somewhere a dog barked once, then went quiet. It began with doors. Not every door, only the ones the captain indicated, with a gloved hand, and he pointed with the certainty of a man who'd already walked these alleys in his head. He didn't shout, he didn't rant. He gave short commands, and men obeyed because his stillness made hesitation feel foolish. A dice den first. 6 men around a table. Coins glinting, knives on belts. They froze when the watch flooded in. One gambler grinned, rotten teeth showing. "Evening, lads," he said. "Fancy a game?" The captain drove his boot into the table's edge. It flipped, coins clattering, dice skittering like beetles. The gambler sprang up with curses, hands going for knives. The captain's sword cleared its scabbard with a dry whisper. One slash low, precise, opened a forearm. The knife fell into the mud. Before the others could move, the captain seized the wounded man by the hair and slammed his face into the wall. Teeth cracked, blood-streaked brick. "On your knees," the captain said. It was not a command so much as a law. One by one, the gamblers dropped, panting, eyes wide. Jorik's men searched them, pulling out stolen rings, a pouch marked with the reeve seal, a strip of cloth bearing a merchant's sigil. The gamblers tried to protest. "It's just luck," one whimpered. "Bind them," the captain said. They dragged the men into the street, ropes biting wrists. The sweep continued. Faster now, stashes found under floorboards, stolen goods recovered from hidden lofts, knives kicked away, faces pressed into mud. The watchmen were shaking, but they were awake, sobered by violence, the way some men only ever sobered. They found the thief behind the cooper's yard. He was halfway up a drain pipe, clinging like a spider, a sack slung over his shoulder. Below him, a shutter hung open. Inside, a woman's voice rose in a frightened cry. "Stop!" shouted a watchman, surprising himself. The thief kicked out, scrambling higher. Jorik lumbered forward, cursing, reaching with his bad hand. The captain didn't run. He stepped into the alley's mouth, judged distance like a butcher judging a carcass, and threw a dagger. It struck the thief's calf. He screamed and fell, hitting the mud hard enough to splash the walls. The sack burst open, silver spoons, a child's wooden toy, cheap beads spilling like teeth. "Please," the thief gasped, hands clawing at the dagger's hilt. "Please don't." "You stole," the captain said, and it sounded like a simple fact, like rain falling. "I'm hungry," the thief sobbed. "So is everyone," the captain replied. He looked at Jorik. "Name?" The thief's eyes rolled white with terror. Hallwicks." Jorik stepped forward. "Captain, hold. He's a gutter rat. Take him to the reeve." The captain drew his sword. The blade came down clean and fast, not theatrical, not angry, efficient, practiced. It took the thief at the neck. Blood sprayed across mud and wall, steaming faintly in the cold. The body twitched once, then went still, head rolling to rest against the spilled wooden toy. A watchman gagged and vomited into the gutter. Another crossed himself, muttering Sigmar's name as if it might scrub the image from his mind. The captain wiped his blade on the dead man's coat. "Drag him," he said. They hauled the corpse to the nearest crossroads, where 3 alleys met and one narrow street ran toward the square. The captain positioned the body with a soldier's care, arranging limbs as if composing a diagram. He set the severed head atop the chest, angled so the dead eyes stared down the road. Then he placed the sack of stolen goods beside it, neatly piled, like offerings. "Leave him," the captain said. "Let the quarter learn." By the time they returned to the square, the rumors had outrun them. People peered from windows and doorways, pale faces flickering behind shutters. Mothers pulled children close. Men kept hands near knives they didn't dare draw. The night watch walked like something new, still ragged, still frightened, but no longer entirely empty. At dawn, the corpse at the crossroads had been seen by half the town. Some spat, some prayed, some quietly locked their doors and decided, perhaps, to stop stealing. The streets were quieter, not safer, not kinder, quieter, the way a room is quiet after a scream. Clara met the captain outside the watchhouse as the sky lightened from black to bruised grey. Sister Margaret was with her, jaw set hard enough to crack. Jorik stood a few paces back, eyes hollow, smelling of mud and old anger. "That was murder," Margaret said, voice raw. "That was a lesson," the captain replied. "You butchered a man for bread and trinkets," Clara snapped. "This town has laws. This town has corpses. the captain said, and his helm tilted toward the road beyond the gate, toward the unseen ditches where travelers died. Your laws didn't stop them from piling up. Margaret's hand clenched around her hammer pendant. Fear is not faith. Fear is the beginning of discipline, the captain answered. Discipline is the beginning of order. Order is the only wall you have left. Jorik's voice came out like gravel. And what of the boy? He asked. Freyd's child. Your order. Your punishment. The captain paused just long enough to feel like a blade hovering. We will find him, he said. But first, we forge the hands that will do the finding. He turned to Jorik. Your men are drunks and cowards, he said bluntly. Make them soldiers, Jorik bristled. By when? The captain looked east, where a thin line of pale light cut the horizon like a knife. By dawn, he said, as if dawn were not already bleeding into the sky, or as close to it as you can manage. Either way, you start now. He strode to the yard behind the watch-house. Line them up, he ordered. Jorik hesitated, then barked commands. Men shuffled, confused, shivering. Some still stank of last night's fear. Some stank of last night's drink. They formed a line crooked, uneven, a poor imitation of a force. The captain walked along them slowly, inspecting. He stopped in front of a young man whose hands trembled on his spear. You, the captain said. Why do you shake? Cold, the youth lied. The captain leaned in. No, he said softly. You shake because you know you are weak. Weakness gets people eaten. He moved on. He stopped before another heavier man with a bruised cheek. Why are you here? Because you said, the man stammered. Wrong, the captain said. You are here because you want to live. He stepped back, letting the whole line see him. Rain had stopped, but the air was sharp and wet. The town's rooftops steamed faintly, as if the buildings exhaled rot. You wanted safety, the captain said, voice carrying across the yard, across the mud, across the watching faces at windows. You wanted the road open. You wanted your children in their beds instead of in graves. You wanted chaos to stop knocking at your door. He let the silence stretch until it felt like a hand closing around the throat. You will pay for it, he continued, in sweat or in blood. His gaze, those steady eyes behind the slit, swept the line like a whetstone. Choose, he said. And if you choose wrong, I will choose for you. Chapter 2. Order, paid in bone. Morning in Hoen Mark did not arrive like a blessing. It crawled in under the door like damp, turning the hearth smoke sour and the sleep in your eyes to grit. The dawn that followed the black captain's first sweep came washed in grey, and the town woke with the strange, sick feeling of a wound scabbing over tight, itchy, and painful to touch. The crossroads corpse was gone by midday, not because the watch had grown delicate, because crows had worked fast, and someone, no one admitting who, had dragged what remained into a ditch before children saw too much. But the lesson stayed. Men whispered in alley mouths. Women locked windows earlier. The lower quarter grew quieter, in the way a kennel quiets when the whip comes out. Even the rats seemed to move with less arrogance. People watched the watch now, and the watch knew it. Jorik Ruln did not sleep. He sat in the watch-house yard with a tin cup of bitter tea that tasted like boiled rope, listening to the captain's orders roll over his men like thunder. Jorik's bad hand ached in the cold. His good hand ached from gripping the urge to hit anyone hard enough to make sense return. "Line," the black captain said. The watchman stumbled into formation. Formation was generous. It was a crooked row of men in mismatched coats and dented helms, holding spears like brooms. Half of them blinked too slowly. One still stank of last night's ale as if it lived in his pores. The captain walked the line and corrected them with touches that were not gentle. He shoved shoulders back. He kicked boots into alignment. He knocked a spear haft hard enough to numb fingers. "Your feet are wrong," he told one man. "That is how you die. Again, again." The word landed like a stone. Most men in Hohenmark had not died before, but in the captain's voice it sounded like death was simply a mistake you repeated until you learned. He turned his helm slightly toward Jorek. "Sergeant," Jorek grunted. It was what passed for respect from him when his temper was banked. "Captain, make them march." Jorek opened his mouth to argue march where, for what, in whose mud. But the captain's stare cut it off like a blade to rope. Jorek lifted his cudgel and bellowed until throats tightened and spines straightened. They marched, not down the main road where merchants might see them and feel comforted, not around the square where children could clap. The captain drove them straight into the worst ground outside the palisade, where the earth was a sucking swamp and the wind carried the stink of old fires from the road. Mud grabbed at boots. Men cursed. One slipped and went down to his knees, arms flailing as if drowning. The captain didn't slow. He walked the line like an executioner pacing a scaffold. "Up," he said. The man tried to rise. The mud held him. He strained, face flushing with effort. The captain stepped behind him and drove a boot into his back. The man lurched forward, regained his feet, stumbled, then found his rhythm in pain. "You will not fall," the captain said. "Falling breaks the line. A broken line dies." They marched until legs trembled. Then they marched again. Then the captain made them march back, and when they reached the yard, he didn't let them collapse. "Shields!" he ordered. They had not had proper shields in years. Hohenmark's militia had planks with straps, warped boards with nails hammered through to serve as bosses, round shields scavenged from dead men. The captain accepted none of their excuses. If a man had no shield, he was given a door ripped from a condemned shack. If a man had no straps, he was given rope. "Hold," the captain said. They held. Arms shook. Sweat cut through grime in pale streaks. A few men whimpered softly, ashamed of it, as if the sound might make the captain turn his head. He did. He always did. When a man's shield dipped, the captain struck it with the flat of his sword hard enough to jolt the shoulder. Up. When a man's stance widened, trying to make it easier, the captain kicked his ankle inward, narrow. When a man's elbows sagged, the captain grabbed him by the collar and slammed him back against the line. "Do you want to live?" the captain asked. The man gasped, eyes watery. "Yes." "Then hold." They held until arms burned as if packed with coals. The captain did not raise his voice. That was the worst of it. His calm turned suffering into something inevitable, like winter. Weakness was punished publicly, not with speeches, with consequences. On the third day, a young watchman barely older than a boy, cheeks still soft, vomited during the march and fell out of step. The captain halted the entire line. He walked back, drew his dagger, and cut the straps of the boy's boots. The boots fell apart, soles flopping. The boy stared, bewildered, humiliated. "You will march without them," the captain said. "If your feet bleed, you will remember why you do not fall behind." Jorik stepped forward, anger flaring. "He's just a lad." "He is a soldier," the captain replied. "Or he is dead weight." The boy marched. Blood bloomed on the mud like small red flowers. No one laughed. No one spoke. Everyone watched. And the memory went into them like a nail. Live blade sparring followed. The captain did not believe in blunted practice steel. "Bandits don't use wood," he said. "Beastmen don't apologize." He paired men up and made them fight in the yard with real weapons. Not to kill mostly, but steel kissed steel, and sometimes steel kissed flesh. Cuts opened. Teeth broke. A man lost 2 fingers when his opponent panicked and swung wild. The captain watched without blinking. "Your fear makes you sloppy," he told the man missing fingers. "Your sloppiness makes you dead. Bind it and learn." Sister Magritte came to the yard on the 5th day and watched from the edge, her hammer pendant heavy against her chest. She said nothing while men bled. Her jaw tightened when the captain stepped in to demonstrate a disarm that ended with his blade held at a trainee's throat so close it drew a bead of blood. "Mercy later," he murmured to the boy. "Strength first." Magritte's voice finally cut through the sound of clashing metal. "And what is this making them?" she demanded. "Defenders or butchers?" The captain's helm turned toward her. "Defenders," he replied. "Butchers only kill what they're told. Soldiers choose." Magritte's eyes narrowed. "That is a lie dressed in discipline." "Truth does not keep men alive," the captain said, and turned away. Desertion stopped. Not because the watch suddenly felt loyal to Hohenmark, not because their hearts had been stirred by duty. Desertion stopped because the captain hunted deserters like wolves hunted deer. The first deserter was found 2 miles from town, in a ditch where the road dipped and the scrub grew thick. He had tried to crawl away in the dark with a sack of dried meat and a stolen purse. The captain's patrol came back at dawn, dragging him by the wrists, his elbows raw, his face gray with fear. The deserter sobbed. "I can't, Sigmar. Help me. I can't." The captain did not speak. He simply nailed the man's badge to the watch-house door with a spike, then threw the deserter into the yard. "See?" he said to the assembled watch. He tried to leave his fear behind. Fear followed him. He didn't execute that one, not immediately. He kept him in a cage outside the watch-house, a crude thing of iron bars salvaged from an old stockade. The deserter sat inside, shaking, exposed to rain and cold, watched by the town as if he were a warning sign hammered into the earth. By the 2nd night, no one spoke of leaving. By the 3rd, men who had once joked about slipping away spoke in whispers of the captain's eyes and how they seemed to find you even when you hid. Clara Venn found her ledger doing something it had not done in years, balancing. Coin came in. Not much, but enough. The reeve's seal went on to paper with less trembling. Stalls paid their dues because thieves no longer skimmed from purses in the crowd. The butcher stopped losing meat to rats. The tanner's yard stopped being visited by gangs who demanded protection money with smiles like knives. She should have felt relief. She felt nausea. She walked through the square and saw fewer brawls, fewer broken noses. She also saw men flinch when a black cloak passed. She saw children hushed sharply when they laughed too loud. She saw a woman avert her eyes from the watch-house as if even looking might bring the captain's attention down like an axe. Order, yes, but it tasted like iron. The first big proof of it came with the toll road thieves. They were a plague that had ridden the road for months, men who called themselves collectors, who set up ropes across the track and demanded coin to pass. Pay, and you might live. Refuse, and you might end up in a ditch with your throat opened. Sometimes they took fingers as receipt, sometimes ears. Clara had written complaint letters to distant officials until her hand cramped. No one came. No one ever came. Then, one cold afternoon, the captain walked into the reeve's cramped office without knocking and dropped a bloody pouch onto the desk. Teeth clacked inside it when it hit the wood. Clara stared. "What is that?" "Payment," the captain said. He opened the pouch and spilled its contents across her papers. Rings, a handful of coins, and 3 severed ears. Each ear had a small brass stud punched through the lobe marks of the toll thieves. The captain had brought her proof, the way hunters brought pelts. Clara swallowed bile. You caught them?" "Most," the captain replied. "They will hang at dusk." Clara stood so fast, her chair scraped. "We have procedures." The captain tilted his helm. "Your procedures fed them," he said. "Mine will end them." At dusk, the town gathered as if drawn by a magnet, made of fear and fascination. A gallows had been raised in the square, old wood reinforced, rope new. The toll thieves stood beneath it, hands bound, faces bruised. There were 8 of them. The ringleaders wore defiant sneers that cracked at the edges when they saw the captain waiting with his sword drawn. Jorek stood to the side, expression hard, his bad hand clenched. Sister Margaret was there too, lips pressed tight. Clara stood on the steps of the shrine, fingers white on the railing, wishing she could be anywhere else. The captain did not read charges. He did not ask for confessions. He simply walked along the line, pausing at each man to study him like a map. "You," he said to the first, a big brute with a scar down his nose. "You broke the caravan line at the ditch and took the rear wagons." The thief blinked, startled. "How?" The captain moved to the next. "You killed the driver after he paid," the man spat. "Prove it!" The captain stopped at the third. "You ran when blades were drawn. You left your men to die." That one went pale. He started to shake. Sister Margaret's eyes narrowed. She watched the captain's helm, as if trying to see through metal into whatever lived beneath. "He knows too much," her expression said. "Not rumor, not guesswork, knowledge." The captain turned to the crowd. "This is what a broken line looks like," he said, and his voice carried with unnatural clarity. "They cut the road because no one held it. They preyed on the weak because you let them." A murmur rose, anger, agreement, fear. The captain gestured sharply. "Hang the ringleaders." 4 were dragged forward. The ropes went over their heads. Their bravado collapsed into pleading when the nooses tightened. "Wait, please." "Merci." A woman in the crowd wept. Someone cheered. Someone vomited. The trapdoors dropped. The thieves kicked and jerked, boots scraping air. One's neck snapped with a crack like a branch. Another strangled slowly, face turning purple, eyes bulging, tongue lolling. The sound was wet and obscene, a chorus of dying. The captain watched, as if watching weather. When it was done, he ordered the remaining 4 hauled to the ground again. "Untie them," he said. The crowd murmured, confused. The captain drew his sword and stepped close enough that the bound thieves could smell him. "You will carry your dead," he said, "and you will place them where I tell you." They did it, sobbing and stumbling under the weight of swinging corpses. The captain directed them to the crossroads at the edge of town where the roads split. One branch toward the forest, one toward the marsh. He had them lay the bodies down in a line, arms spread, legs angled, heads positioned. It looked wrong, like a diagram, like something a battlefield commander might sketch with corpses instead of ink. He stepped back and addressed his watch, who stood in rigid silence. "This," he said, pointing with the sword tip, "is what happens when your line breaks. One gap and the enemy pours through. These men were the gap." He turned to the remaining thieves, shaking and filthy. "If you return to the road," he said, "you will join them. If you warn others, you will live." He cut their bonds and shoved them toward the dark. They ran. That night, Hohenmark's taverns were quieter. Not empty people still drank, because they didn't know what else to do with themselves, but quieter, as if the walls were listening. The worst drunk in town, a man named Hal Brusk, sat at the broken cask, with his face in a puddle of spilled ale, snoring like a dying boar. Hal had been a carpenter once. Now he was a ruin. He drank until his eyes went glassy, until he forgot the names of his own children, until he woke in gutters with his trousers around his ankles, and laughed at the shame, because shame was lighter than memory. The captain entered the tavern without fanfare. Conversations died. The barkeep froze with a mug half raised. The captain walked to Hal Brusk, grabbed him by the collar, and hauled him upright in one smooth motion. Hal's head lolled, mouth hanging open. Who Hal slurred. The captain dragged him through the tavern as if dragging a sack of grain. Chairs scraped as patrons leapt out of the way. Someone protested weakly. No one stopped him. Outside, in the street, the captain slammed Hal against a wall. Hal's teeth clacked. He blinked blearily. "You are Hal Brusk," the captain said. Hal tried to grin. "Depends who's asking." The captain produced a rope from his belt. He looped it once around his gloved hands, not threatening yet simply demonstrating. "Watch," he told the tavern crowd that had spilled into the doorway. Hal's eyes widened. "Now hold on. You will choose," the captain said, voice low. "The watch or the rope?" Hal's laugh died halfway out. "I ain't no soldier." "You are a burden," the captain replied. "But burdens can be turned into weapons." Hal's gaze darted toward the tavern, toward the warmth, the bottle, the oblivion. Then he looked at the rope and saw his reflection there, a man already halfway dead. He swallowed. "The watch," he croaked. The captain's rope vanished back onto his belt. "Good," he said. Then, to Hal's astonishment, he slapped him hard across the face once, twice sharp enough to ring the skull. Hal reeled, eyes watering. "What?" "Wake up," the captain said. "Your life begins now." Hal Brusk became a miracle in the ugliest sense. Not holy, not gentle. A transformation beaten into shape. They shaved his beard. They washed him until the stink of ale left his skin. They made him run until he vomited, and then run again. The captain drilled him harder than anyone, as if punishing him for every wasted day. Hal stopped shaking. His eyes sharpened. He began to speak less. He began to listen more. Within a week, The man who had once fallen asleep in puddles stood in the yard at dawn, armor strapped correctly, spear held properly, face blank and intent. When others complained, Hal looked at them with a frightening calm and said, "Hold your shield up. It hurts less than dying." People started whispering about the captain's miracles. Sister Margaret watched those whispers with growing unease. She watched the captain correct a stance and recognized the movement, the kind of drill used in real wars, not town militias. She watched him crouch by a patch of trampled mud outside the gate and point out spoor to Jorek like a hunter. "See the split hoof?" he said. "Beastman, 2 days old, moving west." Jorek frowned. "You read tracks like a ranger." "I read death," the captain replied. "It leaves marks." Margaret's eyes narrowed. "Where did you learn that?" The captain's helm turned toward her. "From living," he said, and walked away. Clara's ledger continued to balance. With every line of ink that finally matched, she felt more complicit. She stood at her window one evening and watched the watch patrol the street's lanterns steady, boots striking in unison, and she hated how comforted she felt. She hated that the town's fear was making her job easier. Then, one afternoon, a caravan arrived unmolested for the first time in months. It came at midday, wheels creaking, horses steaming, banners of merchant houses snapping in the wind. No burned canvas, no soot, no silent haunted eyes. The teamsters laughed, actually laughed as they rolled through the gate. People poured into the road as if witnessing a miracle. Children ran alongside the wagons. Someone rang the shrine bell, bright and frantic. The square filled with celebration so sudden it felt unreal. The taverns opened barrels they'd been saving for a wedding that never came. Oldenfright, hollow-eyed since his child vanished, managed a shaky smile as he handed out honey cakes for free, hands trembling with the joy of not being ruined. Clara stood in the crowd and let herself breathe for the first time in weeks. Sister Margaret watched the wagons with a cautious hope she did not quite trust. Jorek stood with his men, shoulders squared, and for a heartbeat he looked like the soldier he had once been. The captain did not smile. He simply watched, helm still, as if cataloguing the town's reaction to relief. That night, while laughter still lingered in the streets, the bread theft happened. A boy thin as a fence post, cheeks hollow, eyes too big for his face, was caught outside the baker's, clutching a loaf to his chest like treasure. He had torn sleeves, bare feet, and the smell of hunger that made men avert their eyes. He froze when the patrol lantern swung onto him, and for a heartbeat he looked like he might bolt. Hal Brusk moved first, fast and efficient, seizing the boy by the wrist and twisting until the loaf dropped into the mud. "Thief," Hal said flatly. The boy's eyes filled. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "Please, my sister, she's—" The captain stepped into the lantern light. The street went quiet, as if the town itself held its breath. Jorek's stomach knotted. He had seen thieves die now. He had told himself they were bandits, killers, men who deserved it. This was a starving child. "Captain," Jorek said, voice tight. "It's bread." The captain's helm tilted. "It is theft," he replied. The boy began to sob, shoulders shaking. "Please," he whispered. "I'll work. I'll do anything." Sister Margaret appeared at the edge of the crowd, having followed the patrol soundlessly. Her face went pale with fury. "No," she said, stepping forward. "Enough." This is not justice. This is not Sigmar's way. Clara pushed through behind her, eyes wide. She saw the boy's ribs showing through his shirt. She saw the loaf in the mud, ruined. She saw the captain's hand resting on his sword hilt as casually as a man resting on a fence. "Captain," Clara said, forcing calm, "we can handle this. A whipping, a fine. Put him to work at the baker's." The captain drew his sword. The whisper of steel against leather sounded louder than the boy's sobs. Jorek stepped forward without thinking, cudgel in his good hand, bad hand clenched tight enough to hurt. "No," he said, and the word came out like a growl. "Not him." The watchman froze. Hal Brusk's eyes flicked from Jorek to the captain, something like fear and admiration twisting together. The captain turned his helm toward Jorek, slow and deliberate. He stepped close enough that Jorek could see his own distorted reflection in the black metal. "You hesitate," the captain said softly. "He's starving," Jorek hissed. "We're not monsters." The captain leaned in until his voice was meant only for Jorek, though it seemed to carry anyway, as if the night itself wanted to hear. "Mercy is a luxury bought by strength," he murmured. "Do you have any to spend?" Jorek's grip tightened on the cudgel. His throat worked. For a heartbeat the entire street hung on the edge of a choice: defy the captain and risk the fragile order snapping, or obey and become something he could never wash off. The boy sobbed quietly, unaware that he had become a battleground. The captain's sword tip lowered, pointing at the boy's chest like an accusation. "Choose," the captain said. And in the lantern light, Hohenmark's new order waited to see what it would cost next. Chapter 3. The Beastmen Come Calling. The boy died with bread on his lips. Not because he ate it, there was no time for that. Because when the black captain's blade went through him, the loaf lay split in the mud beside his cheek, and the smell of warm crust and cheap flour rose up with the steam of spilled blood. He made a small sound, more surprise than pain, and then his body sagged as if hunger had finally finished what winter started. Jorek didn't remember moving. He remembered the moment before, his cudgel raised, his lungs full of a word he couldn't afford to say, and then the moment after, when the crowd was screaming and Sister Magritte was shoving through people like a battering ram, her face the color of old parchment. The captain didn't wipe his blade in haste. He cleaned it slowly, methodically, on the dead boy's torn sleeve, as if tidiness were part of righteousness. "Leave him," the captain said, as if issuing an order about a broken crate. "Let the town learn that hunger does not excuse theft." Magritte spat a curse that tasted of smoke and scripture. "That's not teaching," she hissed. "That's desecration." The captain's helm turned toward her. "Desecration is what waits in the trees," he replied. "I'm merely setting the price of living." Clara Venn stood very still. Her hands were clenched so tightly her nails cut half-moons into her palms. She had come out to stop a whipping from happening. She watched a child get turned into a warning sign instead, and she felt something inside her, the last soft thing, curl and blacken. The crowd dispersed like scared cattle, not in outrage, in obedience. People who might have thrown stones at the reeve for losing a sack of grain now hurried home without meeting anyone's eyes. Doors barred, shutters slammed, lanterns dimmed, order tightened around Hohenmark like a noose. And then the woods started answering back. It began with marks. Crude sigils gouged into the outer palisade posts, scratched in the night, deep enough to cut through tar and into wood. They were not letters. They were not human. Twisting shapes that hurt the eyes if you stared too long. Lines that seemed to crawl when the light shifted. The first watchman who found them crossed himself and vomited into the mud. The captain ordered the marks scraped away and the posts burned, and for a day the gate smelled like charred pitch and fear. Then came the carcasses. A sheep found hanging from an oak, flayed while it still lived, its skin peeled back like a cloak, its eyes staring, unblinking, accusing the sky. A cow discovered in the ditch, legs snapped, belly cut open, innards arranged in looping patterns that made Sister Margaret's stomach twist. 2 dogs went missing and came back in pieces, nailed to a fence like trophies. The farmers started sleeping with axes beside their beds. The reeve's office filled with trembling men demanding protection they would not pay for with coin only, with someone else's blood. At dusk, the howls began. Not wolves. Wolves sounded like hunger. These howls sounded like laughter, like something mocking humanity's fragile walls. They came from the tree line beyond the fields, rolling through the mist and the low hills. Sometimes they were answered by a horn, deep, raw, like a beast's throat turned into an instrument. Hoen Mark huddled behind its palisade and whispered a word people hated to speak aloud. Beastmen. The captain did not call for prayers. He called for pikes. He made the watch cut long saplings, strip them, harden their tips over fire, and reinforce them with crude iron heads scavenged from broken tools. He formed squads, proper squads, with leaders, signals, rotations. He drilled them in formation until their feet moved without thought. He took lanterns from taverns and ordered new ones crafted from tin and horn, their light hooded so it wouldn't blind the line. He taught them lantern discipline. Never swing it wide. Never point it into your own men's eyes. Never let it flare and show your shape to the dark. He taught them to stand close enough that shoulders touched. A lone man is meat, he said. A line is a weapon. He instituted rotating sentries on the wall, 2 awake, 1 resting, 1 sharpening steel, no exceptions. Any man caught asleep on watch was dragged into the yard and made to hold a pike overhead until his arms shook. If he dropped it, the captain's sword tapped his throat, a reminder more terrifying than a cut. Desertions did not return. There was nowhere to run now. The woods were hungry. Jorik found himself doing something he hadn't done in years, teaching men to survive, not just to obey. He corrected grips. He showed them how to brace a pike against a charge, how to lock shields so they overlapped, how to keep breathing when the noise started. He pushed them hard, harder than he would have dared before the captain arrived, but he did it with the grim kindness of a man who'd seen what panic did to a line. Don't swing like you're chopping wood, he growled at one youth, yanking the spear haft into position. You stab. You keep stabbing. You don't look at the thing's face. You look at its throat. The captain watched Jorik's training with silent approval that felt like a brand on the skin. Sometimes he stepped in to demonstrate a technique, and those moments were worse than any beating. He moved like someone who had fought in real wars, small adjustments, deadly economy. He didn't talk about courage. He talked about angles. Sister Margaret noticed. She couldn't not notice. He knew beastmen signed the broken branches that meant a herd had passed, the smeared dung that marked territory, the fetishes of bone and hair tied to low branches. He could tell how many there were by the depth of a hoof print, and whether it sank toe first or heel first in mud. He could smell an ambush the way a hound smelled a blood trail. "Where did you learn that?" she demanded one evening as he crouched by a trampled patch of wet grass outside the north field. The captain didn't look up. "From listening to the wrong things," he said, "and surviving them." "That's not an answer," Margaret snapped. "It's the only one you get." Clara's ledger kept balancing, and she started to hate the sound of her own pen. Crime collapsed because nobody wanted to risk being posed in the street like a lesson. Traders started coming again, drawn by rumor of safety, and the town's stomach filled while its soul shrank. People whispered that the captain was worse than bandits because bandits only stole. "The captain changed you," they whispered anyway, quietly, behind shutters, with the kind of fear that made every word sound like treason. Then the Beastmen stopped whispering and started taking. It happened on a moonlit night, when the clouds broke and the world turned silver and sharp. The outer farms lay beyond the palisade, clustered around low stone walls and half-frozen troughs. Families lived there because someone had to work the land, and because the town's walls could not stretch far enough to protect everything. The first scream came from girls' piggery, a thin, ripping sound, followed by the squeal of hogs in panic, then a man's voice, high, desperate, cut off, as if something had bitten it in half. The watch bells clanged. Lanterns flared on the wall. Men stumbled from beds with armor half-strapped, spears in trembling hands. Jorik hauled them into formation by instinct, barking until their voices found strength. Pikes front, shields behind. Close the line. Out in the fields, shapes moved. They were not men. They were wrong silhouettes, too broad, too hunched, too fast. Horns caught moonlight like hooks. Eyes glinted like coins at the bottom of a well. They ran on cloven hooves that tore up frozen earth, and their laughter rolled over the fields like a sickness. A farmhouse door exploded outward. A woman stumbled into the yard, clutching a child. Behind her came a beastman with a crude axe and a goat's skull for a face, its mouth stretched in a grin too human to be natural. It raised the axe, and the captain was suddenly there. He had not shouted. He had not announced himself. One moment the yard was chaos. The next he appeared out of shadow like a nightmare stepping into moonlight. His sword took the beastman's forearm at the elbow. The axe dropped. The creature bellowed, a sound like a bull gargling blood, and tried to slam into him. The captain pivoted, planted, and drove steel up under its jaw. The beastman jerked, convulsed, and went down, hooves scrabbling. "Form!" the captain snapped, and the word cracked through the night like a whip. The watch surged forward as a single shape, ragged but coherent. Pikes leveled, shields locked. The captain used them like a spear point, driving them toward the center of the attack rather than letting them scatter to chase screams. A beastman charged, horns lowered. It hit the pike line and impaled itself with a wet, shocking sound. Another followed and got its throat opened by a watchman whose hands had finally stopped shaking. Blood sprayed across shields. Men gagged and held anyway. One watchman panicked and tried to step back, opening a gap. A horned brute plunged toward it. Jorik shoved the panicked man back into place with his shoulder, taking the impact himself. His bad hand screamed as the brute's weight hit the pikes, the line held by inches and stubbornness. Jorik's teeth ground. "Hold!" he roared. "Hold!" The captain moved along the line, striking not wildly but precisely. He stabbed into armpits and throats, places armor didn't cover. He kicked a fallen beastman's head aside so it wouldn't tangle pikes. He dragged a wounded watchman out from under hooves and shoved him back behind shields without slowing. The fight was close and filthy. Beastmen hacked with crude blades and gnashing teeth. Watchmen stabbed and braced and screamed. Lantern light caught on gore and made it glitter. A beastman leapt onto the shield wall, hooves scraping wood, trying to climb over like a rabid animal. Hal Brusk, once the town's worst drunk, now a grim-eyed machine, rammed his spear up through the creature's belly. The beastman howled, clawed at him, and Hal leaned in, face expressionless, and twisted until the scream turned wet. It worked, barely. When the horn sounded again deep, raw, the beastmen withdrew, not fleeing in panic, but pulling back like a tide, dragging their wounded, leaving their dead scattered like broken toys in the moonlight. They retreated into the tree line, where shadows swallowed them whole. The watch stood panting, shields slick with blood. Men stared at their own hands as if surprised to find themselves alive. Somewhere, a cow lowed mournfully. A farmhouse smoldered. Its roof collapsed inward like a dying lung. The captain walked through the aftermath and did not offer comfort. Comfort made men soft. He found a severed goat horn in the mud and picked it up, turning it in his gloved hand like an object of study. His helm angled toward the woods. "They were testing," he said quietly. Sister Magritte stepped up, face tight with grief. "Testing?" she spat. "They killed people. They didn't bring their whole herd," the captain replied. "Not yet." Clara arrived at dawn, boots sinking in the trampled field, eyes wide as she took in the corpses, beastmen and men alike. The town reeve's clerks trailed behind her, hands over mouths, ink and paperwork suddenly meaningless. "How many?" Clara whispered. Jorek looked at the bodies of his men and swallowed something bitter. "7," he said hoarsely. "7 dead. 3 hurt bad." Clara's knees almost buckled. 7. Hohenmark could barely spare 7 for the living, let alone the dead. The captain didn't let grief settle. He didn't let it become an excuse to retreat behind the walls and wait to be eaten. That same day, as fog rolled in from the low marsh and wrapped the trees in a pale shroud, he called for a counter-raid. "We hit them," he said in the yard, voice flat. "Now, before they hit us again." The watch stared at him, as if he'd suggested marching into the realm of chaos itself. Sister Magritte stepped forward. "You want to take townsmen into the tree line?" she demanded. "Into their home?" "Oh! Oh! 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 Oh!" "Into the place they think makes them strong," the captain replied. "Strength is a lie the forest tells them. We will correct it." Jorek's jaw clenched. "We don't have enough men. We have enough to die slowly if we do nothing," the captain said. "Or enough to strike and make them bleed for it." Clara found a voice. "And if you lose them out there?" she asked. Quiet. "Deadly. If you lose what's left of our watch?" The captain looked at her, and for a heartbeat she felt like he was weighing her like a coin. "Then the town dies later instead of now," he said. There was no argument in that, only arithmetic. They went into the woods at dusk. Fog clung to the ground like dirty wool. Brambles snagged cloaks. The trees stood too close together, trunks twisted, branches clawing at the sky. Every sound felt magnified. Boots squelching, breaths rasping, the soft clink of metal. Lanterns were hooded, their light narrow and mean, revealing only slices of the world at a time. The captain led from the front, silent as an omen. Jorik kept the line tight behind him. Hal Brusk moved like a man reborn for violence, eyes fixed ahead. Sister Margaret muttered prayers under her breath, not because she expected Sigmar to answer, but because the words were a nail hammered into fear. They found signs quickly, bone fetishes dangling from low branches, smeared with old blood, totems made of skulls stacked and lashed with sinew, a pile of gnawed human bones, half buried in leaves, the skull cracked open like a nutshell. A watchman whimpered. Jorik hissed, "Quiet," and shoved him back into the line. Then the ambush came, not with a roar, with a sudden, brutal rush of shapes from the fog, horns, axes, teeth. Beastmen poured in from both sides, trying to split the watch apart, trying to break the line. The captain shouted one word, "Brace!" Pikes snapped up. Shields slammed together. The first beastman hit and got impaled, its momentum driving it deeper onto the spear point until it gurgled blood and collapsed. Another leapt over a low bush and buried a cleaver into a watchman's shoulder. The man screamed, dropping his shield. A gap opened, and the captain was there, sword flashing. He took the beastman's head off with a single cut, then kicked the dying body into the gap like a plug. "Close!" he barked. They fought in choking fog, close enough to smell beast sweat and wet fur, close enough to feel hot breath on faces. The watch held, but men died. One was dragged screaming into the mist, his voice cut short. Another fell with a horn through his gut, staring at the sky as if confused. Then the captain drove forward, forcing momentum, forcing the beastmen to give ground. He wasn't trying to win cleanly. He was trying to carve a path. They reached a clearing where a crude pen of lashed branches and sharpened stakes squatted like a wound in the forest. Inside it, something moved, small, human, a child. Olden Fright's boy was alive. He was filthy, hair matted, cheeks hollow. His wrists were bound with rawhide. Bruises striped his arms like whip marks. His eyes were too large for his face, reflecting lantern light with the stunned emptiness of someone who'd learned the world had teeth. Clara's words from weeks ago, "We will search," rang in Jorik's head like an accusation. The boy looked up and made a small, broken sound. "Father?" he whispered, voice thin as thread. Sister Margaret surged forward, hammer pendant bouncing, hands reaching for him, then froze as a horn sounded deeper in the woods. A bigger shape emerged from the fog, a beastman chieftain, towering, its horns curved like sickles. It wore scraps of mail and a cloak made of stitched hides. Its eyes were red-rimmed and intelligent in the worst way, and in its fist it held a crude banner topped with a skull that still had scraps of hair on it. It laughed a bubbling, delighted sound. The captain stepped in front of the pen, sword raised. "Take the child!" he snapped. Jorik shoved two men toward the boy. They hacked the rawhide ties with shaking knives and lifted him, cradling him awkwardly, as if afraid he'd break. The chieftain charged. The captain met it head on. Steel rang. The beastman's axe smashed down, and the captain caught it on his blade, the impact driving him back a step into mud. He pivoted, cut low, opened the beastman's thigh. Black blood spilled. The chieftain bellowed and swung again, forcing the captain to give ground. The watch tried to hold the line while retreating, but fog and brambles made order a thin, fragile thing. A beastman slipped in and drove a spear into a watchman's ribs. The man collapsed, eyes wide. Another beastman grabbed a lantern and smashed it, plunging half the clearing into darkness. Screams, metal, wet impacts, the stench of blood. Jorek fought like a man who decided dying wasn't an option. His cudgel cracked a beastman's snout. He braced a pike with his good hand and drove it forward. Hal Brusk took a cut across his cheek and didn't react beyond a blink, stabbing again and again until his spear haft was slippery. Sister Margaret swung her hammer, crushing a beastman's knee and then its skull, shouting Sigmar's name like a curse. And through it all, the captain moved with terrible focus, locking the chieftain in place while his men withdrew with the child. He did not kill the chieftain. Not then. He cut it. He marked it. He let it live long enough to remember. When the watch finally broke free of the clearing and stumbled back toward town, leaving bodies behind in the fog, the captain was the last to retreat. He backed away slowly, sword still up, eyes fixed on the chieftain's silhouette. Only when the horn sounded again farther now, calling the herd back, did he turn and vanish into the mist after his men. They returned to Hohenmark, with the child alive and 4 more watchmen dead. The town wept and cheered and prayed all at once, messy with relief and grief. Alden Freyt fell to his knees in the mud and clutched his son so hard the boy squeaked. Sister Margrethe watched the reunion. With tears she wiped away angrily, as if softness were an indulgence. Clara stood near the gate and felt her knees tremble. They had won something. They had also paid for it in blood, and she could feel the town's fear hardening into something permanent. That night, after the dead were laid out and the living tried to sleep, Margrethe cornered the captain by the shrine. "You risked the town," she said, voice low and furious. "You risked those men. For what pride?" The captain stood with his back to the whitewashed wall, helm shadowing his face. "For time," he replied. "Time?" Margrethe spat. "You talk like you're buying days at a market stall." "I am," the captain said. "Every day we live is bought." "And why?" she demanded. "Why push them into the woods? Why make them march until their feet bleed? Why teach them like you expect a war, not raids?" The captain was silent long enough that the shrine bell's faint creak in the wind sounded loud. Then he said, quietly, "Because this is not the war. This is the knocking at the door." Margrethe's breath caught. "Then what are you?" The captain's head tilted slightly, as if considering how much truth she could carry without breaking. "I am building," he said. "Building what?" "A force," he replied. "A unit that can hold when the real darkness comes. Not just for Hohenmark, for something bigger than this mudhole." Margrethe stared at him, horror and understanding mixing like oil and water. "You're using them." "I am forging them," the captain corrected. "They were already being used by bandits, by fear, by their own weakness. I merely chose a different purpose." Clara heard rumors the next day, how the captain had fought the chieftain alone, how he moved like a trained killer, how his blade never hesitated. The whispers grew teeth. Some claimed he was a hero. Some claimed he was a monster, wearing a man's shape. Most didn't know what to think, so they chose fear. Fear was simpler. Jorek, meanwhile, began pulling recruits aside when the captain wasn't looking. He taught them little things that weren't in the captain's lessons. How to breathe when you're scared, he told them. How to keep your wits when you see something that shouldn't exist. How to remember you're still human. Hal Brusk listened with the same blank intensity he brought to violence, but even in him, Jorek saw a flicker, something that might have been gratitude, or might have been the last ember of a soul refusing to go out. The captain watched these small acts of humanity like a man watching a crack in a blade he meant to perfect. Near midnight, when the watch rotated and the yard lay quiet under a thin, sick moon, the captain stood alone beneath the sagging comet banner. He held a piece of chalk and sketched lines on a board, formations, angles, arrows, then crossed some out and drew them again. His movements were slow and precise, the care of a craftsman. He paused, looking out at the sleeping barracks where his men lay bruised and exhausted. For a moment, the helm tilted as if he could see through walls, through flesh, through fear into the core of what he was making. "Not yet," he murmured, voice barely more than breath, still too soft. He erased a line with the heel of his glove and drew a harsher one in its place. Chapter 4. Worthy of Fighting. The rain returned as if the sky had been waiting for the right moment to drown Hohenmark. It began at dusk, thin needles at first, then a steady, cold downpour that turned the roads to slurry and the fields to black mirrors. Water ran off the palisade timbers in greasy sheets, making the old wood shine like something oiled for slaughter. Lantern light smeared in the wet air. The town smelled of mud, smoke, and the sour breath of too many bodies packed behind too thin a wall. The watch rotated in silence. No jokes, no idle talk. Men checked straps and wiped blades, and did not meet each other's eyes for long, as if any look held too much truth. The Beastmen had been testing. Everyone knew it now. The skirmishes, the howls, the signs. Those had been fingers tapping on a door, measuring the strength of hinges. Tonight the door would be kicked in. On the north wall, a sentry leaned over the parapet, squinting into the rain-soaked dark. The tree line was a bruised smear beyond the fields. Fog clung low, rolling in pale curls along the ground. For long minutes there was nothing but the hiss of rain and the groan of old timber in the wind. Then the horn sounded. It was not the small, mocking call from before. This was deep enough to vibrate in the ribs, a raw bellow dragged out of some beast's throat and forced through a bone trumpet. It rolled across the fields and struck the palisade like a fist. Another answered it closer, higher, wild with glee. On the wall, men flinched. Somewhere in the town, a child began to cry. A dog howled and was silenced by a boot. The black captain stood in the yard behind the watch-house with his cloak soaked and clinging. He did not look up at the sky. He looked at his men. They were not the same men who had once slept on duty. Their coats were still patched, their armor still mismatched, but their stances were different now. Feet planted, hands steady, eyes forward, pikes held like purpose. Jorek Rune stood among them, cudgel gone, sword now in hand despite the stiffness in his ruined fingers. His face was gaunt with sleeplessness and the kind of resolve that came only after you had already lost too much to be afraid of losing more. Sister Margaret waited by the shrine steps, hammer pendant in her fist. lips moving in a prayer that sounded more like an oath. Clara then stood beside her, cloak drawn tight, ledger forgotten, her eyes fixed on the gate, as if she could will it to hold. The horn sounded again, and this time there were voices behind it, howls, brays, the snapping laughter of things that did not belong in the world of men. The captain raised his hand. "Lantern line," he said. Men moved. Lanterns were lit and hooded, their light narrow and disciplined, held low so it didn't glare off wet shields. The watch formed in the street leading to the north gate, a tight block of pikes and boards, shoulders touching. The captain walked along the line, touching a shoulder here, nudging a stance there, small deadly corrections. His voice was calm enough to be obscene. "Close," he said. "No gaps. Gaps are graves." Outside the palisade, shapes emerged in the rain, like a herd boiling out of a nightmare. Beastmen, dozens at first, then more, silhouettes with horns and hunched backs, weapons held high. Some wore scraps of stolen mail, some wore nothing but fur and filth. Their eyes glinted with wet hunger. Their hooves tore the sodden ground into paste as they charged. Behind them came something bigger. A chieftain, horned like a twisted crown, its cloak stitched from hides and human hair. Its axe was massive, crude iron, bound to a haft with sinew. It bellowed, and the herd answered, slamming forward faster, eager to die if it meant they could kill first. The north gate shuddered as the first bodies hit it. Not swords, not axes, flesh and weight. The beastmen threw themselves against the timbers in waves, hooves battering, shoulders ramming. The old iron bands groaned, nails screamed in wood. "Brace!" Jorek roared. The watch's pike block locked tighter. Shields slammed together. Men sank their boots into mud and held like the wall itself had moved inward, becoming human. The gate burst inward with a crack that sounded like a tree splitting in a storm. A beastman surged through the gap, axe raised, mouth frothing. The first pike took it in the chest. The second took it in the throat. The creature gurgled and spasmed, pinned like a grotesque banner. Another shoved in behind it, forcing the pike points back, and the line held, pushing forward together, pike butts digging into earth, bodies leaning in a collective grind. Rain hammered down, turning blood into diluted rivers that ran between boots. The smell was sharp iron, wet fur, excrement, smoke from torches sputtering in the damp. The palisade breach widened as beastmen hacked at the posts and tore at the broken gate timbers. They came in screaming, horns slick with rain, eyes wide with joy. The watch met them with a wall of pikes. It was brutal and cinematic in the ugliest sense. No clean heroics, only mechanics. A pike shoved into a ribcage, a shield buckling under an axe blow, a man screaming as hooves trampled his leg, another man stepping into the gap without thinking, taking the next impact because there was no other choice. Hal Brusk was in the front rank, face a blank mask, spear thrusting in steady rhythm. A beastman swung at him with a cleaver, slicing his forearm open. Hal didn't flinch. He thrust again and again until the beastman's belly split and black blood poured out like oil. Hal's breath steamed. His eyes never left the line. A watchman to Hal's left broke fear, finally chewing through discipline. He tried to pull back, tearing his shield away. The gap opened like a wound. A horned brute dove toward it, axe already coming down. Jorek lunged and slammed his shield into the brute's chest, knocking it off balance. The axe caught Jorek's shoulder instead, biting deep. White pain flashed through him. He grunted, teeth clamped. He did not fall. He shoved his sword into the brute's throat, feeling cartilage give, feeling hot blood spill down his wrist. "Close!" he shouted, voice ragged. "Close the bloody line!" Men slammed together again, sealing the gap. Jorek's shoulder bled into his coat. He kept moving because the line demanded it. The captain was everywhere, not like a man running, like a shadow slipping between lantern pools. He struck at joints and throats, cutting tendons, disabling rather than dueling. When a beastman clambered over a fallen body and tried to vault the pikes, the captain caught it midair, with a blade up through the jaw. It fell back into its fellows, kicking, choking. He used the watch as a weapon, the way a smith used a hammer, not caring for individual dents so long as the shape became true. Then, as if the night itself wanted to mock them, a second threat arrived. From the south road came torchlight and shouting human voices, harsh with authority and greed. Metal clinked. Hooves splashed. A column of mercenaries, men in mismatched armor, carrying pikes and crossbows, their tabards stained and unfamiliar, approached the gate with the swagger of predators smelling opportunity. At their front rode a broad man with a mail coat and a red sash, his helmet crested, his face hard, with the practiced cruelty of someone who'd been allowed to be cruel for profit. He bellowed toward the south gate. "By right of charter and contract, this town falls under toll protection. Open up and surrender your watch. Any who resist will be treated as rebels and hung." Clara heard it from the square and felt ice crawl up her spine. "They chose tonight," she whispered. Margaret's eyes narrowed. "Vultures," she said. "They smell blood and think it's coin." The reeve's clerk, white-faced, shaking, stammered, "We can't fight on two sides." The horn at the north breach roared again, beastmen flooding in, and the mercenary captain's torchlight gleamed on wet steel at the south gate. Hoen Mark was being pinched between monsters and men. The black captain's helm turned, slow and deliberate, as if he'd expected exactly this. He raised his hand again, and the watch's lantern line shifted like a single creature. "Second rank," he snapped. "Split." Jorek's eyes widened. "You'll weaken the breach." "You will hold," the captain said flatly. "Because you must." He pointed with his sword toward the south gate. "Clara Ven," he called. Clara stiffened. She had not expected to be addressed like a soldier. "What?" "Get your people off the streets. Barricade the south square. If the gate falls there, it will be humans first. Humans can be reasoned with." His helm angled, and even through metal she felt the weight of his attention. "Beastmen cannot." "And who will hold the south gate?" Clara demanded, voice sharp with fear. The captain looked at Jorek. "Your sergeant will." Jorek stared. Rain ran down his face like tears he couldn't afford. "Me?" "You," the captain said. "And whoever you trust not to break." It was the moment he engineered clean, cruel, inevitable. The watch would have to act without him, because the captain did not go south. He stayed at the north breach, where the beastmen pressed hardest, and raised his blade as if daring the herd to try him again. He held the line there personally, forcing Jorek to lead elsewhere. Jorek understood, and the understanding tasted like bile. The captain wasn't just defending. He was testing the watch the way a man tested a blade by striking stone. Jorek turned to Hal Brusk. "You're with me," he barked. Hal nodded once, silent, spear slick with blood. Jorek grabbed 3 more men who'd held the line in the fog, men who'd seen death close and kept their feet. He tore them from the breach and ran them through the rain-swept streets toward the south gate, leaving the north battle behind like a roaring furnace. The town's lanes were chaos. People scrambled, dragging furniture into doorways. Dogs barked. A woman screamed Margaret's name like a prayer. Clara was already shouting orders, her reeve voice cutting through panic, her hands pushing children into doorways and slamming shutters. At the south gate, the mercenaries were already battering the timbers, not with desperate weight like beastmen, but with a ram. They knew what they were doing. That made them worse. "Open!" the mercenary captain shouted. "You'll be protected, whether you like it or not." Jorek climbed the wall ladder, shoulder screaming, and looked down to see torches massing like a swarm of fireflies. He saw crossbows raised, men grinning at the thought of loot. He saw the mercenary captain's red sash, bright as a wound. Jorek's mouth went dry. "They'll kill us," one of his men whispered. "No," Jorek said, surprising himself with the steadiness of his voice. "We'll kill them if they try." He shouted down, voice carrying through the rain. "This is Hohenmark. We don't need your toll protection. Turn around." The mercenary captain laughed. "You don't have a choice, old dog. Your marshal's nowhere to be seen." Jorek's eyes narrowed. "We have our own captain." "Then bring him," the mercenary sneered, "or I'll pull this town apart plank by plank." Jorek didn't have the captain. That was the point. He had only what the captain had forged into him and his men: discipline and the willingness to stand. "Lanterns," Jorek barked. They raised hooded lanterns along the wall, not to flood the field with light, but to create controlled cones, blinding flashes aimed into the mercenaries' faces, turning their crossbowmen into squinting silhouettes. "On my mark," Jorek growled. "Loose." They had a handful of crossbows and a few hunting bows. Not enough for a siege. Enough for a lesson. Now, bolts hissed through rain. One mercenary toppled with a bolt in his throat, blood spraying like a fountain. Another took one in the eye and fell without a sound. Men shouted in surprise and anger. The mercenary captain roared, "Ram! Break it!" The ram hit the gate with a boom that shook the wall. The timbers groaned. "Hold!" Jorek shouted down, and his men braced their pikes through the murder holes, stabbing at hands and shoulders that reached through cracks. A mercenary climbed with a hook, grinning up at Jorek. Hal Brusk stepped forward and drove his spear down through the man's mouth, pinning him to the ladder. The mercenary's eyes widened in shocked indignation, then went glassy. He slid off, choking on rain and blood. The south gate held barely, but every strike of the ram sent vibrations up through Jorek's bones, and he knew it was only a matter of time. Then the horn from the north breach sounded again, closer, angrier, and screams rose from the far side of town. The beastmen had pushed deeper. Jorek's men exchanged terrified glances. 2 battles, 2 gates, 1 town. Jorek felt the old urge rise. The urge to run, to retreat, to survive alone. The captain's voice came unbidden into his head. "A lone man is meat. A line is a weapon." He clenched his jaw until it hurt. "We don't break," he snarled at his men. "Not tonight." Back at the north breach, the wall of pikes was buckling. The beastmen had piled bodies so high that their own dead formed ramps. They climbed over carcasses, slipping in gore, and threw themselves into the line with insane strength. A watchman went down under a hammer blow, skull crushed. Another screamed as horns gored his thigh. The shield wall shuddered, soaked and shaking. Sister Margaret fought there now, hammer swinging, prayers turned into battle cries. She shattered a beastman's kneecap, then its jaw, then drove the hammer head into its throat until it stopped twitching. Her arms burned. Her breath came in harsh gasps. She kept moving, because if she stopped, the line would stop. Clara had retreated to the square, coordinating barricades, hauling water for fires, dragging the wounded into the shrine. She saw the town's faces wide-eyed, haunted, and she understood the truth in her gut. Even if they survived tonight, the captain's way would not leave them whole. At the height of the North battle, the captain did something that made Margaret's blood turn cold. He stepped out of the line, not fleeing, not falling, simply moving away, retreating a pace, then another, creating space, just enough space that the beastmen surged forward, seeing a gap, smelling victory. The watch panicked. The front rank wavered. "Hold!" Margaret screamed. The captain did not fill the gap. He watched. It was the purest cruelty, forcing the line to choose discipline without him. Jorik was gone. Clara was elsewhere. Margaret felt the moment teeter on a blade's edge. If they broke now, the town died. If they held, they would prove they were more than fear. Hal Brusk, at the north breach again, now having left men at the south gate under Jorik's command, saw the gap and stepped into it without hesitation. He planted his spear, braced it, and shouted at the men beside him. "Close!" he barked. "Close, you bastards!" They did. The line snapped tight like a fist closing. Pikes leveled, shields locked. Men pushed forward together, not because the captain told them to, but because they had learned what breaking meant. The beastmen hit and died in a wet crunch of impalement and screaming. The ramp of bodies grew higher, but the line held. Lanterns shone in controlled arcs, illuminating targets for pike thrusts. The watch fought as a unit, ugly, exhausted, disciplined. The captain watched for a heartbeat longer. Then he stepped back in, like a blade sliding home. With the watch holding the breach, the mercenary captain at the south gate realized something grim. The town was not collapsing, it was hardening. His men were dying on wet ground for a prize that suddenly looked expensive. He spat and shouted, "Fall back! We'll take it after the beasts finish their work." But the beasts did not finish their work, because the watch did. At the north breach, the beastmen finally began to falter, not because they felt fear, but because they felt cost. Their chieftain's horn sounded again, sharp and commanding. The herd began to withdraw, dragging wounded, leaving their dead piled like grotesque cordwood. The watch did not chase. The captain didn't allow it. "Hold the line," he said. "Don't become hunters in their forest. Let them remember." By dawn, the rain had softened to a cold drizzle. The fields outside the palisade were a churned graveyard. The breach was plugged with broken timbers and bodies. The air stank of wet fur and iron. Smoke rose from a few burned roofs, thin and miserable. The mercenaries were gone, slinking back down the road like rats denied a feast. Hohenmark still stood, barely. Men sat in the mud and stared at their hands. Some laughed quietly, the sound hysterical. Others wept without shame. Sister Margaret moved among the wounded, pressing cloth to wounds, whispering prayers that sounded more like apologies. Clara walked the breach with stiff steps, eyes taking in the dead watchmen she knew by name, boys who'd held pikes with trembling hands and now lay still. She swallowed hard and forced herself not to look away. In the yard behind the watch-house, the captain gathered the surviving watch in a rough line. They were bruised, cut, exhausted. Their armor was smeared with gore. Their eyes were different now, harder, older. Jorik approached from the south, shoulder-bound, rainwater dripping from his beard. He stopped a few paces from the captain, breathing heavy. Margaret and Clara stood behind him. The captain regarded them as if he'd been waiting. "You held," he said. Jorik's voice came out low and dangerous. "You stepped out," he accused. "You made them hold without you." "Yes," the captain replied simply. Margaret's fists clenched. "You gambled with lives. I invested them," the captain corrected. "And the return is standing before you." Clara's voice shook with anger and exhaustion. "People died." The captain's helm tilted. "People die whether I'm here or not. The difference is whether they die screaming in the mud or die buying tomorrow." Jorik stepped closer. "Why?" he demanded. "Why do this? Why rule with terror? Why kill a starving boy? Why hang men like diagrams? Why?" His voice cracked. "Why turn us into this?" The captain was silent for a long moment. Then he spoke, and for the first time his words landed without riddles. "Because the borderlands produce victims," he said. "Soft towns, soft men, easy meat. The Empire forgets you until you're ashes." His helm angled toward the tree line, where distant shapes still moved like bad thoughts. "Something larger is coming. Not just beast raids, not just bandits. The world is sharpening." Jorik's jaw tightened. "And you think fear is the whetstone?" "Fear is the first," the captain said. "Discipline is the second. Will is the third. Together they make a force that can stand." Margaret stepped forward, voice like a blade. "You could have built discipline without turning the streets into an altar of blood." The captain's voice stayed calm. "Could I?" he asked. "Would they have listened? Would you have listened, sister, when the watch slept and the road burned? Or would you have prayed harder and hoped?" Margaret's face flushed, rage and shame mixing. Clara's eyes narrowed. "You're not here to save us," she realized. "Not really." The captain's helm turned toward her. "I am here to forge you," he said. "And then to see what you become without me." Jorik swallowed. "Without you?" The captain stepped closer, until Jorik could see his own reflection in the black helm's dull sheen. "Yes," the captain said, "because one day you will need to fight more than beastmen. You will need to fight men like the mercenaries, men who wear authority like a mask, men who claim order while feeding on weakness." Jorik's eyes narrowed. "Men like you." For a heartbeat, the yard went very still. The captain's voice softened, almost intimate. "Exactly," he said. "If you cannot stand against me, you cannot stand against what is coming." Jorik's grip tightened on his sword. "Then fight me now," he said, and the words came out before he could stop them. "Right here. If you want an opponent, take one." Margaret's breath caught. Clara's heart thudded. The captain paused, as if considering, then slowly drew his sword. The sound was quiet, but it carried through the yard like a promise. He pointed the blade tip at the mud between them. "Show me," he said. Jorek stepped forward, boots squelching. His shoulders screamed in protest. His bad hand throbbed, wanting to fail. He ignored it. He raised his sword and took the stance the captain had drilled into him, feet planted, shoulders square, breath controlled. The captain moved first, not with a wild swing, with a probing strike meant to test. Jorek parried, steel ringing. The impact traveled up his arm like lightning. He gritted his teeth and held. The captain pressed, quick cuts aimed at wrists and joints. Jorek blocked, retreated a step, then forced himself not to retreat further. The captain's blade flicked toward his throat. Jorek barely caught it, the steel scraping close enough to kiss skin. "You're slow," the captain murmured. "I'm tired," Jorek snarled and shoved forward, slashing at the captain's helm. The captain ducked, and Jorek's blade sparked off metal, ringing like a bell. Men watched with wide eyes. No one cheered. This wasn't sport. This was a fight for the shape of the town's future. Jorek attacked again, driving the captain back a half step. For a brief moment, he felt something fierce bloom in his chest. Not fear, not obedience, defiance. The captain's sword snapped out, catching Jorek's blade and twisting. Jorek's grip slipped. His sword fell into the mud with a wet thud. In the same motion, the captain's blade stopped at Jorek's throat, steady as a line drawn in ink. Jorek stood breathing hard, throat exposed, rain running down his face. He did not flinch. "Kill me," he rasped. The captain's blade did not move. "No," he said. "You don't die. You lead." Jorek stared at him. "Why spare me?" "Because you held," the captain said. "And because you challenged. That is what I came for." Margaret stepped forward, voice shaking with fury. "And what of all you've done?" she demanded. "You don't get to wash your hands because one battle went your way." The captain's helm turned toward her. "I don't want clean hands," he said. "I want capable ones." Clara's voice came out quiet but sharp. "Then leave," she said. "If you truly want us to stand without, you leave now, before your order becomes the only language we know." The captain looked at her for a long moment. Then he sheathed his sword with a slow, deliberate motion that felt like a decision being made. He stepped back from Jorek and addressed the watch. "You fought," he said. "You held. You didn't break when I stepped aside. That is the beginning." He turned away, cloak dripping, and walked toward the gate as if the yard and all the eyes on him were nothing. Margaret called after him, voice raw. "You'll be hunted." The captain didn't stop. "Good," he said over his shoulder. "Then you'll keep sharpening." Clara's mouth opened. Words tangled anger, relief, fear. But the captain was already moving through the mud lanes toward the breach, toward the road, toward the gray beyond the walls. Jorek watched him go, chest tight, with something he didn't have a name for. The captain reached the broken gate, paused, and looked back once, just once, at the watch standing in a line that was straighter than any line Hoen Mark had ever held. Then he disappeared into the rain. Dawn broke like a bruise fading. The rain eased to a thin mist. Smoke drifted from wet ash. Men repaired the breach with shaking hands, hammering new timbers into place. The dead were carried to the shrine yard, laid out in rows. Sister Margaret moved among them, whispering names, closing eyes, pressing Sigmar's hammer to foreheads as if sealing them against whatever waited beyond. Clara stood at the gate with her ledger under one arm, not because it mattered, but because she didn't know what else to hold. She watched the road, mud, slick and empty, and wondered what kind of town she now governed, one saved by terror, forged by blood. Mid-morning, a caravan appeared. Not many wagons, 3, maybe 4, but intact. Horses stepping carefully through mud, a merchant banner snapping weakly in the cold breeze. The drivers looked wary, scanning the tree line, but they came forward. They passed through the gate and saw the watch standing silent, pikes straight, eyes hard. No cheers rose. No drunken celebration. Just a grim nod from the lead teamster, a mutual recognition. The road was still dangerous, but it was not hopeless. The pikes were straight. The watch stood silent, and somewhere beyond the tree line, far enough that it might have been imagination or might have been a promise, the horn answered once, low and distant, as if the dark itself had taken note and decided to try again.